Chapter 431, God's Mercy. Time slipped by, turning into months in the blink of an eye. The weather grew colder, and the situation in Eryxis's kingdom became increasingly difficult, but none of this affected Demeter in the palace, whose life remained as usual. Although the stores of food were running low, King Cleius, even while reducing his own expenses, did not cut back on Moira's meals, so the goddess noticed no particular changes. In such times, she didn't need to worry about any troubling matters. Demeter simply followed her own rhythm, applying the sacred food to the little prince during the day and burning him with ritual fire at night. The flames consumed Demophon's original flesh and bones, and the vitality brought by the sacred food allowed new ones to grow continuously. The goddess's ritual was going very smoothly. Apart from causing her some fatigue, there was nothing undesirable. This day was the same. The prince slept soundly, bathed in flames, and felt no pain at all. Next to him, Demeter concentrated on baptizing his body. The night was deep, and silence reigned in the palace, with only the crackling sound of the sacrificial fire burning continuously inside the room. Everything was as usual. Until a moment later, a knocking sound came from near the door. Dong dong. Dong dong dong. Moira, are you there? The soft sound of knocking rose, distinctly heard in the quiet room. That was Queen Metanira's voice. Her tone was a bit tense, somewhat urgent, but she still did not speak loudly. She hoped to receive some response, yet after a good while, the room remained silent without any other sounds coming through. Having focused her mind on the little prince, Demeter paid no attention to the visitor and continued her work. Most of the flesh and bones had already been replaced, and there was not much left. Today's target of the ritual fire was Demophon's still tender cheeks. The goddess's fingers gently traced his face, and mysterious transformations ensued. From then on, the forces of this world could no longer harm him, and even the influence of divine power would be greatly reduced, no longer able to kill him easily. Outside the hut, Metanira hesitated, filled with concern. The light shone from the wooden hut, indicating that its inhabitant was probably not asleep yet. But in response to her call, there was no feedback from inside. The queen didn't know the identity of the person inside, or rather, even her husband. King Cleius's understanding of Moira's identity was merely a guess. However, as the most powerful warrior of Eryxis, the fact that he detected nothing unusual about her presence meant she must be far from ordinary, so he repeatedly warned everyone inside the palace not to disturb her lightly. Metanira's husband's caution made her aware of Demeter's distinction, so in theory, she should not have disturbed this mysterious presence in the middle of the night, but today was an exception. Not long before, having awakened from sleep, the queen suddenly missed her child. She went to Demophon's usual room to visit her son, whom she hadn't seen for a long time, but obviously, it was empty. Just like every night in the past few months, the goddess had already taken him away, leaving behind only the small wooden bed. Metanira was somewhat panicked, not knowing where Demophon was at the moment. But she quickly remembered that her son was left in the care of that mysterious guest by her husband. So when the hurried queen saw the bright light of the fire inside the hut, her heart was somewhat relieved. Perhaps he was just taken to her room by Moira. After all, it was impossible for outsiders to intrude into the palace, and they had no enemies outside. But even so, Metanira still knocked on the door. Just a quick check, and she could apologize sincerely afterward. Thinking this, the queen stood at the door and knocked on the wooden door again. Dong dong. Dong dong dong. Moira, are you there? Moira? Is Demophon with you? But there was no response. It was as if the room was empty. Moira, if you're there, if it's not convenient for you to let me in, please just respond. Metanira asked again, but still, there was no answer from the room. Beneath the night sky, aside from the rustling wind, there was only the faint sound of the fire burning. After asking several times and receiving no response, the queen hesitated for a long while. Her longing for her son finally overcame her, and with the squeak of the wooden hinges, she pushed the door open. She cautiously entered, surveying the scene, and almost immediately, Demeter, standing in front of the stove, was discovered by her. "Ah, Moira, so you're here." Relieved, it was fine as long as she hadn't gone to bed. Metaneira took a few steps forward, smiling as she asked. "Moira, why didn't you respond just now?" "I thought." "Ah." In the starlight-shrouded city of Eryxis, a sharp scream tore through the quiet palace, and almost at the next moment, lights were lit one after another. The guards were startled awake, and those who were still on patrol immediately set out. They didn't know what had happened, but the queen seemed to be in danger. In the depths of the palace, on hearing his wife's piercing and desperate voice, King Caius also suddenly stood up from his desk. This mighty warrior instinctively drew his bronze sword, but in the next moment, he froze in place. Chapter 432. The king, already on the brink of legend, easily determined that the source of the voice was inside the palace, and not far off. That place was where the presence suspected to be a deity resided. In an instant, a myriad of emotions flashed through his heart. He wanted to draw his sword and charge ahead without regard for anything else, but various old rumors surfaced one by one. Clitius didn't understand why things had turned out this way, nor why the queen had provoked that mysterious being, but if it truly was a deity, then the consequences of angering her could very well be the destruction of the entire city-state. The king began to hesitate, feeling as if he had a 10,000-pound weight on his back. As the son of the first city founder, and one who had followed his father to establish a new city, Clitius didn't care much about his own life and death, but if his death was not only useless but would also cause greater disasters, the courage to draw his sword suddenly retreated from his heart. Moreover, he had 2 sons and 4 daughters, which left the king in great turmoil. However, before he could truly make a decision, the next moment, a terrible might burst forth again from the place the voice had come from. The immense pressure covered the entire palace, causing the guards patrolling various areas to stop in their tracks. Feeling that overpowering presence, which he absolutely could not contend with, the king clenched his teeth and walked towards that direction. Now, he was the only person in the palace who could still move freely. Bearing the terrifying oppression, Clitius moved forward. He had to find out what happened, no matter the outcome, whether good or bad. Crackle. Crackle. In the room, the goddess's hand was on the infant's face. The tiny sounds of the fuel bursting in the fire seemed to continually echo in her ears, like a rhythmless melody. But it was always like this, and Demeter had long grown used to it. Even when she thought she heard some other noise, she didn't pay much attention. The mortal realm was just the mortal realm, no matter what happened here, it was of no concern to the goddess. Now, to her, completing the baptism of Demophon was key. The pleasantness of her past life made her feel that no one would come to disturb her. It seemed it wouldn't take long, just a few more days, and this mortal's offspring would attain immortality, henceforth existing alongside the divine. Crackle. Ah! Suddenly, a sharp cry pierced her ears, and the goddess, who had been fully engrossed, woke up with a start. The intense emotion contained in that voice startled Demeter momentarily, and her hand involuntarily flinched, causing the protective force around the little prince to retract as well. Then, the next moment, a loud wail echoed throughout the room. Wah! Even if it was just for an instant, the pain from the sacrificial fire had awoken the infant from his sleep. He began to cry loudly, expressing his discontent, and at the same time, the queen realized that her child was still alive. Her eyes wide with shock, the queen rushed forward as if she had forgotten the threat of the flames. She picked up Demophon from the fire. Feeling the normal texture of the infant's skin in her arms, and his loud crying, Metaneira finally breathed a sigh of relief, and only then did she turn to look at Demeter beside her. The queen realized that perhaps the other wasn't attempting to harm Demophon, but instead was doing something else, something she didn't understand. Perhaps this wasn't a bad thing. Thinking this, she aimed to justify her impulsive action. But as Metaneira looked up, she was met with a pair of ice-cold, indifferent eyes. In that moment, the queen felt as if she wasn't being looked at as a person, but rather as a blade of grass, a pebble. She wanted to say something, but the other spoke first. Mortal, do you know what you've done? Coming back to her senses from the alarming change, Demeter spoke calmly within the room. But facing her, the queen frantically tried to explain. Moira, I didn't mean to, You've disrupted my ritual, mortal. His face will now bear a never-fading mark, just like a criminal. She spoke calmly, but a boundless rage rose from within her, not for the little prince, but from another source. At that moment, Demeter suddenly realized that she might not like this child that much. She was puzzled as to why she felt this way, but as she spoke, watching Metanira's reaction, the goddess understood something. Hearing Demeter's words, the queen's face showed no disdain, although somewhat regretful. She wouldn't let it change her affection for Demophon, but it was different for the goddess. She liked the child, but only if it was a flawless, perfect offspring nurtured by her. It was a transference of her longing for her daughter and a reflection of her jealousy towards Leto, the goddess of nursery, and her son. Without powerful strength, and even driven to desperation by Hera, Apollo still turned out so excellent. By comparison, Demeter could only make her daughter hide and seek refuge, and in the end, she couldn't escape death. He was just a mortal. Even if a prince, what was so special about him to a deity? He merely appeared before the fertility goddess at the right time and thus received her affection. But he was never irreplaceable, especially at this moment, when the masterpiece that should have been perfect showed a flaw. Chapter 433. The goddess had never experienced the games of later generations. She would not know how frustrating and dissatisfied a person who was about to perfectly complete a level would feel in the face of a low-level mistake. She only knew how much energy she had invested before and how intense her desire for destruction was now. Sorry, Moira, I didn't know you were doing this for him. Enough. In front of Demeter, Metanira still wanted to explain, but the goddess no longer wished to listen. The queen's voice only caused her annoyance. The more she cared for the child, the more it made the goddess realize that the other was a mother, whereas she was not. So the game of pretense ended here. Since it was no longer perfect, it had no reason to exist. The next moment, sacred power that had reached a demigod's realm burst forth, instantly enveloping the entire Eryxis. The lamps that had just been lit were suddenly snuffed out, and as she watched a queen overwhelmed and brought to the ground, Demeter's appearance began to change. Age receded, youth returned. Luxurious ornaments adorned her, and the attire of the gods replaced that of mortals. At this moment, the true form of the goddess was so dazzling and so noble and untouchable. However, in the eyes of Clitius, who had finally arrived outside the door, the goddess revealing her true form was terrifying. The pressure from the essence of life caused him to feel fear, but the king still stepped forward, trying to calm her rage. Your Highness, I am Demeter. The king was interrupted, and facing the two in front of her, the goddess's voice was like eternal frost. I am a principal god of Mount Olympus, the deity that presides over the growth of all things. Foolish mortals. You have made a grave mistake. I could have granted your beloved son immortality, but now, he cannot escape the fate of death. Silently, the vitality within the infant, originally meant to counteract the sacrificial fire, suddenly boiled over. It had been the treasure mortals dreamt of, capable of rejuvenating the old and healing the dying. But now, its power acted like a deadly poison, snatching away Demophon's life in an instant. The baby's cries stopped abruptly, and the queen, who had been pinned to the ground, suddenly widened her eyes. She brought her cheek close to her young son's face, but now, he was devoid of life. No. A piercing cry once again rang out in the palace, yet this time, the goddess did not even glance at her. The boon bestowed upon Demophon had come at a whim, and so it was natural that it end with a whim. Therefore, she looked toward the king outside the door, quietly waiting for his reaction. In the gaze of Demeter, Clitius's hands clenched tightly. His wife's reaction made him realize something. He even pressed his hand on the long sword at his side for a moment, but in the end, the king still put his hand down. He knelt on one knee, by the queen's side. Then, with a slightly trembling voice, he expressed his utmost loyalty to the deity before him. Thank you for your boon, goddess. If this is your decision, then it must be his best fate. Very well. Nodding her head, as the fury was vented, Demeter's emotions also began to calm. Looking at the king before her, she could sense his pain and resentment, but the goddess did not care. Not every mortal was as powerful as the one who swung a sword at the divine child on the day of the great flood. Besides, even that human was facing only a demigod, and against a being like Triton, even one who was not adept at fighting, the goddess could easily erase. So at this moment, a hint of pity arose in Demeter's heart. Having just caused the outcome, she now felt reluctant. This seemed contradictory, but it was actually not. The human heart is always complex, and the deities of chaos, in this regard, are no different from humans. Standing in the room, Demeter thought of many things. The moment she first came to the city and was warmly received by the king's daughters, the first time she saw Demophon and remembered her daughter with a heavy heart, being amused by an old servant's joke in the palace. And the pleasant days she had spent in Eryxis. Looking at the queen lying on the ground, who had already lost hope and voice, a sense of condescending benevolence rose from Demeter's heart. No matter what, she was but a mortal. Her ignorance was the reason she had disturbed Demeter, and now, she had paid the price for it. So, looking at the king before her, Demeter slowly began to speak. Your queen has disturbed me, mortal king, but in my benevolence, I forgive her transgressions. And now that the misdeed is over, your merits should not be erased. Starting from tomorrow, send your other son to me. Though your second son's fate is not to be with the gods, to your eldest, I shall still bestow the glory closest to that of a deity. His blood seemed to turn icy cold, and Clitius opened his mouth but could not find the words to speak. He did not know what Demeter truly intended this time, or if she actually meant to give a reward. He only thought he was about to lose another child. But in the end, the king simply bowed his head slightly. Your Highness, thank you. Thank you for your boon. Waving her hand, Demeter turned away. The royal christening had been tiring, and everything that followed had worn out the goddess even more. She walked toward the inside of the house and said faintly to the two behind her. Let's call it a day. I'm tired, you may leave. Yes, Your Highness. With a soft reply, the king took the hand of his dazed wife and silently left the room. He was going to bury his child, who had come into this world for only a spring and fall. The underworld. Fields of truth. Unlike the surface world, compared to the past visits, the core of the underworld had become somewhat livelier. In recent years, the mortal realm's winters have grown more severe, resulting in the deaths of many mortals. Moreover, due to the rapid and rampant propagation of humans, the vast majority of them actually held little faith in the gods. Thus, in accordance with the covenant made with the gods above, the bones of a great number of mortals arrived in the underworld. The losses originally caused by Gaia were quickly replenished, and even exceeded. At this moment, within the divine palace of the underworld, Hades sat quietly on his throne, enjoying the rare delicacies of the bleak underworld, and by his side sat Persephone. Demeter's worries were justified. Her daughter had inherited her beauty and had even surpassed her. However, contrary to many deities' expectations, this goddess, who had been in the underworld for more than 100 years, showed no signs of coercion. In fact, she seemed to be in quite a good mood. And the reason for her good mood was naturally the cold winters that afflicted the world above. All of a sudden, the ruler on the throne uttered a light exclamation. He put down the cup in his hand and looked upward. Yet he could not see through the layers of earth. He merely sensed something faintly, a faithless newcomer in death. But to Hades' surprise, the presence was not quite like that of a deity, and probably not much like a mortal either. By his side, Persephone was not at all surprised by this. She casually tasted a piece of fruit, then asked, "What is it? Has another powerful mortal passed away?" "Then you go. As for dealing with the body, I have no interest in it." Chapter 434 The Awakening Mother of Demons. In the divine palace of Hades, Persephone and Hades were seated opposite each other. She knew the reason Hades looked up, but indeed, she was not very interested in it. For just like other deities from the surface, this goddess of the seeds did not take much liking to wraiths exuding an aura of death. As for why Hades was so attentive to this, it was quite understandable. The stronger the life was when alive, the more powerful it would be after death, and the piety generated from such a life was often exceptionally astonishing. The determination of the purity of faith lay in piety, but what determined the quantity was the strength of the life itself. For innately immortal deities, whether the faith was pure didn't have much of an impact, therefore, what truly captured the gods' attention was merely the amount. Perhaps for other divinities of Olympus, they wouldn't care too much about those few powerful individuals. After all, humans were still in a state of barbaric growth, and if it weren't for the winter brought by Demeter, it's likely that the number of mortals would still be increasing. So instead of focusing on those powerful beings, it would be better to increase the numbers. Faith is hard to coerce, mortal lives are very limited, and casting a wide net is the only hard truth. But Hades was different. The lifespan of a wraith depends on the soul, the more potent, the longer it lasts. Without divine bloodlines, the legendary individuals among the fourth generation of human history could scarcely live twice or thrice the lifespan of ordinary people. Still, those of a similar rank among the wraiths could easily survive for thousands of years. This made individual strength quite cost-effective. Moreover, Hades had had enough of those wraiths who liked to worship the nether moon. These skeletons and souls seemed to have a natural affinity for the being that granted them rebirth. So, given any possibility, Hades would rather nurture those unique and powerful beings separately, using his divine power to create a similar environment and grant them new life. This method indeed avoided a lot of trouble. The only downside was that this task itself was not easy. Without the corresponding authority, even though the goddess of the nether moon hadn't prevented the birth of unclaimed magic power from the source, Hades still needed to use a tremendous amount of energy to achieve the same thing. However, if it was just a small number, Hades felt he could accept that. After all, he only needed to pay attention to those subordinates worthy of his notice. As for the rest, wraiths are different from the living after all. These beings who had died once not only lacked so many desires, but Hades also didn't rely on worship to draw faith. Over the years, he had confirmed his conjecture. As Hades, the reverence for his authority and the rules established under this authority from those lives born in the underworld was a form of faith in him. So, whenever he had a chance, Hades would personally visit the mortal realm. But this time, faced with Perseus' question, Hades merely shook his head. It is indeed a powerful aura, but it's not immortal, so I must see for myself. And besides, it seems to have some connection to you. Recalling that fleeting aura, Hades felt somewhat uncertain. It was a sensation tainted with divine aura, and even that breath felt familiar. That was Demeter. Thinking this, as if he finally made a decision, he looked towards the goddess beside him. So many years had passed, and he could now be sure that even if she wasn't the perfect choice, she was the one he needed. If so, there was no need to hesitate anymore. Perse. Although the arrival of winter is indeed a good thing, the gods will not tolerate it forever. One day, they will no longer bear the reduction of humanity, and at your mother's request, they will unite to pressure me to let you return to the mortal realm. But I do not want to go back, she said indifferently, searching on the table and eating another fruit. I can explain to my mother, she will understand me. Perhaps. But whether she understands you or not, Zeus will definitely not understand me. Hades shook his head, having little hope for this. Hades saw all that King Zeus had done for Demeter. Clearly, even if he wasn't as jumpy as Poseidon and had ventured to the desolate depths, Zeus was still far from at ease with him. It could be just the divine king's subconscious check and balance, or he might have seen something. In any case, Zeus' actions had already vaguely expressed his stance. So this time, Hades decided to act first and seize her to the underworld, then demand that King Zeus fulfill his promise. Otherwise, he was sure that something bizarre would happen in between, and it seemed to be unrelated to the master of Mount Olympus. Thinking of this, Hades felt a bit amused. Zeus indeed was the guardian of oaths, he would honor the exact words of an oath. Moreover, in matters outside the oath, he would do even more in the opposite direction. But perhaps it was someone like him who could sit on the throne for longer, if he were human instead of the divine king. King Zeus, truly disgusting. Picking up the handkerchief to dab her moistened fingertips, Persephone raised her head. Her gaze pierced through the walls of the divine palace, overlooking the vast expanse of the underworld from a higher perspective. Chapter 435. As a deity of the earth above, she was not very fond of the gloomy underworld. However, unlike before, there was no longer a mother forcibly demanding that she must stay in the narrow valley. She could freely reside in this vast land, even if it was still a bit monotonous now. Although reason told Persephone that it was Demeter's decision to protect her, she could understand her mother's actions. However, to make a girl filled with curiosity about everything live in isolation and remain in a secluded valley for a century was torture in itself. Besides, in her view, perhaps her own mother had better ways to protect her instead of hiding in a corner deceiving herself. Therefore, Persephone resented Zeus, who had led to all this, but she was not particularly close to the mother she had only met a few times. She felt like she was just a seed, still buried between crevices and rubble, just like her godhood. That was why she had not told Demeter of her whereabouts before, and she had watched as the other caused disasters in the mortal realm. Because she wanted to disgust Zeus, and also hoped to push this goddess who clearly held extraordinary authority. She was also a daughter of Cronus, and all 6 of her siblings were powerful true gods, yet Demeter acted so timidly. Did she not know that the weaker one was, the more they needed to reveal their thorns, to at least make others hesitate when picking the fruit? Fortunately, with her disappearance, her mother finally remembered her authority and learned to protect her through threats rather than escape. At this moment, Persephone felt that her actions were, after all, very right. Some people's nature is such that you need to corner them before they show their threatening side. Without a doubt, her mother was one of these people. If she had acted this way immediately after being forcefully taken by Zeus, the other gods would have long known to give her a bit more respect, even if just on the surface. But thinking of this, the goddess then turned her gaze towards Hades. Demeter might have let the other gods see her in a new light since she had always held that authority, only never mustering the courage before. Persephone, however, did not have that luxury. Her own divine power was truly weak, and no matter how much she bluffed, the outcome would be no different. So all she could count on was this man who had brought her here. So think of a way, Hades. Aren't you the king of the underworld? Zeus is just your younger brother. As his elder, are you only capable of groveling and fawning before him? Looking at her future husband, Persephone sarcastically said, without mincing her words. And in front of her, listening to the goddess's words, Hades was not angry. Or rather, he never got angry over these insignificant things. If it was only to win a temporary victory, I wouldn't have given up competing with Zeus for the throne of the divine king in the first place. Besides, now, the power he has shown is starting to become unclear to me. Shaking his head, his expression somewhat indescribable, Hades once again sipped the nectar in his cup. The resurrected wraiths retain some memories of their mortal lives, so the crafts of the mortal realm have also spread to the underworld. Even the materials became available after Persephone's arrival. Within the fields of truth, the goddess created a garden and used her power to grow various crops from the earth above. Whether it was the fruit they ate now or the nectar, she had planted the materials herself. However, I do not envy him, for I know there is no power gained without cause in this world. The throne of the divine king appears tempting. My grandfather, my father, and even the current Zeus, they gained supreme power for it. But who knows what the cost is? Heh. Persephone scoffed at Hades's words, disregarding them completely. By the time he pays the price, you might already be trained so tame and docile. Big truths anyone can utter, Hades, but the fact remains, Uranus did as he pleased for an epoch, and in front of Cronus, you wouldn't even dare to speak up. State your intentions. Or do you want to tell me that you went to all the trouble of bringing me to the underworld, just so I could amuse myself here for 100 years, and then meekly be sent back to Olympus? Unfold, perhaps in terms of certain sharpness, Persephone indeed inherited some of her father's traits. Just as she said, if Hades dared to bring her down, he should have a way to make her stay. You're right, Perse, I can indeed make you stay here, however, not permanently. After a moment of silence and having made up his mind, there was no need for further hesitation. The years they spent together allowed Hades to understand his future queen more clearly. Although she never knew how to speak politely to him, when she actually set out to do things, she was quite measured. Perhaps, as she herself said, the unkind words were just a cover for inner insecurity. So, facing Persephone's gaze, Hades's expression finally became serious. Silently, that authority belonging to him, half of the underworlds, was summoned, converging towards his palm. The gray and black energies intertwined. As a nexus where the powers of the four primordial gods collided, the forces of the underworld were inevitably tinged with aspects of each of them, weighty, mysterious, and with a twist of order, or rather, the rules within the shadows. 12 crystal-clear fruits gradually emerged in Hades's palm, and with their appearance, even the color on Hades's face turned somewhat pale. Chapter 436. As you can see, Perse, in the past 100 years, I have been getting to know you. But now, I feel you might truly be able to become my queen of the underworld. So just as Zeus and Hera do, I am willing to share my authority with you, provided that you are willing to bear the cost. Cost? Staring at the fruit in Hades' palm, Persephone raised an eyebrow. It had been a casual inquiry, she didn't pay much attention after all, because to her, no cost could be worse than returning to Olympus powerless. Compared to that, even the unnamed fruit in front of her seemed more enticing. She had never seen such a plant before, it seemed it wasn't naturally occurring but rather a manifestation of some kind of authority. But no matter, as the goddess of seeds, just by consuming one, these new plants would spread throughout the underworld from this day on. Yes, a cost. The divine king is the convergence of the laws of the present world, so Hera can share Zeus's authority because, including myself, we are all part of the present world. The underworld is different. With a slight nod, Hades continued his explanation. Your origin is not naturally one with the underworld, which makes it impossible for me to directly make you the queen of the underworld. So Perse, if you wish to share my authority, you must first actively make yourself a part of the underworld. By that time, your power will be like mine, closely linked to the strengths and weaknesses of the underworld. Of course, you are not like me. The symbol of my godhood is naturally a part of the underworld's composition, just as I myself reside here. Hence, I can freely wander to every corner of this world. But if you make the same choice, you will henceforth be bound by the world's laws. And at that time, no one trying to stop you will be able to prevent your return to the embrace of the underworld at the destined times, not even yourself. I understand. Reflective, Persephone briefly pondered before grasping the meaning of Hades' words. And then your purpose is achieved too. When my authority becomes a part of the underworld, wherever I am, the world itself will change accordingly, right? To that, Hades said nothing, but his demeanor said it all. Well then, how many can I eat? Looking once again at the fruit in the hand of the king of the underworld, Persephone repeated her question. At most half, that is the limit you can bear, but I hope you understand that before you eat it, you are still free to decide whether you stay above ground or below. After all, I won't restrain your actions. But. No buts. Interrupting Hades' speech, Persephone took 6 seeds from his hand and swallowed them all at once. Seeds also need a place to germinate, and I think this place is quite nice. There was no sensation at first after the fruit entered her belly. However, soon the goddess felt herself touching something majestic. She was being enveloped, swallowed, merged, and during this process, she also felt a mighty power flowing into her body, gradually coming under her command. This influence was mutual, only because of their different magnitudes. The underworld changed a little, and Persephone changed more. However, this was just right. The underworld after all is not the surface world. A small change is beneficial, but too much would not necessarily be so. The transformation continued, the interaction of laws never ceased. As time passed, at a certain moment, the entire underworld trembled lightly. Something had been fundamentally altered, yet it seemed as though nothing had happened. Only Hades, as the king of the underworld, could clearly feel that under the fields of truth, a weak new life had been born. It was like an ungerminated seed, tiny but hardy and pure. And the moment it emerged, the cycle of the underworld instantly elevated by more than a notch, and even after a surge, it was still slowly strengthening. At the same time, the laws of the present world seemed also to rejoice at this, and their power also tipped some of it down. Gaia noticed this change, but now she had no leisure to attend to it. The other primordial deities also noticed this scene, but upon sensing the familiar atmosphere of the present world, they each turned their gaze away again. The laws responding so directly was essentially confirmation that it was a destined step. Perhaps its process could be changed, but the outcome was always beyond alteration. It was like the birth of the moon and the succession of the divine king, a node of the world's self-improvement, a destined event. Meanwhile, on Mount Olympus, the divine king seemed to sense something as well. However, his active incarnation was unable to identify the source of the problem, and after searching to no avail, he temporarily set aside the strange sensation and called for the wind gods. The matter with Demeter had been dragging on too long. As the divine king, it would not be proper for him to get involved. So he must rely on his loyal servants to make contact. He believed that for such matters, he didn't need to state explicitly, by maintaining an attitude of indifference, they would understand his intentions. This is the authority of the underworld. In the divine palace of the underworld, Persephone, having eaten 6 seeds, opened her eyes. Somehow, her golden hair had turned ashen, her pupils pure black. A faint mist swirled about her, greeting the rebirth of the goddess. Chapter 437. Now, am I the queen of the underworld? Stretching languidly, Persephone felt an unprecedented sense of ease as she embraced her new state. The cold sensation emanating from deep within her soul was not only bearable but somehow comforting. Then, turning around, the goddess stared at Hades for a good while. Suddenly, she asked. So Hades, now that I am your queen, do you wish for me to bear you a prince? Gods do not need heirs, was the terse refusal. Silently, Hades clenched his fist, and the remaining 6 fruits returned to his body. Having resolved a long-standing concern, Hades also did not forget another matter he had been planning to attend to. I'm going to check on that dead soul which has an odd aura. Do you want to come with me? You're really no fun, she said, a hint of disappointment in her voice. Yet, over the centuries, Persephone had realized that the underworld's ruler might have had many reasons for seeking a queen, but they did not include the same motives as Zeus. Therefore, the goddess merely waved her hand indifferently to Hades's reaction, then turned and looked playfully toward the back of the temple. There, she sensed a familiar presence. It was also she who had found her own hidden valley that brought the bronze chariot riding Hades to her. Initially, Persephone had been somewhat grateful to her, but that feeling gradually faded. Whenever she was alone with Hades, the nymph seemed to insist on asserting her presence, even going so far as to say annoying things when the goddess was by herself. Like claiming she was the best candidate to be Hades's wife or recounting all she had done for the Dark Lord, warning Persephone not to harbor delusions. Or mocking her heritage and past, along with other nonsense, seemingly forgetting that, no matter her flaws, she was an inherently immortal deity, while the nymph was but dust never heeded by gods. Previously, Persephone was not quite sure how to deal with her, knowing well her divine status, although she never minced her words. However, now the situation was different. So the goddess extended her hand and with a light grasp, the naiad named Minta was caught in her grip. Wait, Persephone, what are you doing? Minta, seemingly taken aback by being snatched up so suddenly, had a voice tinged with panic, which quickly turned to confidence. She did not believe Persephone would dare harm her. After all, she had worked for Hades for so many years. Immediately, she began to explain. Your Majesty Hades, I wasn't trying to eavesdrop on your conversation. I was just coming to bring you. Her voice cut off abruptly. A mere fluctuation of the power in Persephone's hands silenced the nymph's annoying voice forever. Persephone's fingers then closed in a gesture of finality, intending to utterly erase the clueless nuisance. It was then that a pale hand grasped her wrist. What's the matter, can't bear to let her go. If so, why didn't you stop me from killing her just now?" Without turning around, the queen of the underworld was certain that Hades had just been fully capable of stopping himself. Yet, at the next moment, the response from the king of the underworld made her burst into laughter. "You'll have to learn to be economical, Perse. From now on, the underworld has a part that belongs to you, too." Releasing his hold, with a casual flick of his hand, Minta's figure began to blur. Soon, what remained in her place was a soul mint plant. Of course, this world had not known mint until then. It was newly created by Hades. He believed the plant's unique aroma might serve as a reminder to those who would use it later on. Furthermore, Perse, since you killed her, from today onwards, the tasks that were once hers are now yours to bear. If it weren't for a genuine lack of alternatives, how could Hades have tolerated this self-willed maid? Fortunately, it now seemed that his queen of the underworld was a very capable individual. As his words fell, the king of the underworld turned into light and sped toward the ground. He had already been delayed for quite a time. Watching Hades' retreating back, Persephone gazed for a while before turning around, smiling as she picked up the mint plant and gave a gentle toss. The next moment, countless seeds of mint drifted off in all directions. Reminded of something by the scene, the goddess also conjured the very same nameless fruit that she had previously tasted. "As for you, you shall be called pomegranate." She spoke softly, and thus on that day, 2 new plants came into the world. The underworld gained a queen wielding authority, and Hades finally reached the limits of what a true god could achieve. The next step would be the nearly insurmountable chasm of the heavens. As for the deceased Naiad, aside from the 2 deities present, much like the mint that would spread across the world, no one remembered her name. Outside the world. Tartarus. Centuries passed in the outside world, but here, tens of thousands of years hurried by. Under chaotic time, everything was so erratic. However, since the start of the third epoch, several abnormalities had altered this place, allowing the originally orderless abyss to undergo curious transformations. Layer upon layer of space stretched outward, dissecting the merged realm into distinct planes, and even when observing its spatial structure, it bore some resemblance to the 9 hells. However, it was far more inhospitable here, and the division of its layers lacked any discernible order. Yet, there was one aspect in which even the 9 hells could not compare: the sheer number of hierarchical levels. Beneath Tartarus' vastness, thousands upon thousands of dimensions, both large and small, were birthed. In its unique set of rules, no one knew exactly how many planes existed within because the innate chaos of the abyss might never have paid any heed to such details. And under such circumstances, even if a layer born from chaos was nowhere near as powerful as the 9 hells, this simple multiplication in quantity could not, like the layers of hell, bring any significant reinforcement to the world's inner cycle. But in the face of such an immense accumulation of quantities, it still displayed another kind of beauty. Regardless, when compared to the complete abyss, the 9 hells were much weaker. After all, as the main portion outside the world, Tartarus still possessed power that even the current lane was no match for. For hell to close this gap was likely to take an entire era. Of course, these newly formed layers did not harbor life, as at present, in the entire abyss, there were only 7 beings that truly qualified as living. And just at the very bottom of these million layers, already at the nadir of all worlds, within a void of chaotic hues, 6 towering figures of various appearances floated there. Before them, an indescribable colossal entity bobbed up and down, showing signs of waking up at last. She had intended to sleep a bit longer, but the upheavals in the underworld had startled all the primordial gods, naturally including the abyss. As the beginning of life in the abyss, she, too, was affected. Thus, a consciousness that had slumbered for an era slowly stirred, bringing with it the throbbing power of Tartarus. Chapter 438 Demon Gods. An indescribable core of the abyss. When the transformation of the underworld was complete, its influence was also transmitted here in another manner. Something throbbed, followed by a slight shake of the titanic figure at the core of Tartarus. Perhaps because she had slept for too long, her own power had undergone too drastic a transformation in this process, such that even though she was stimulated, her consciousness awakened slowly. As for the 6 distinct figures, they guarded around their mother, but their consciousness was actually not complete. Or rather, before Moya awoke, they were meant to remain as they were, for the mother of demons was truly the first life that should appear in the abyss. Time slowly passed, and the consciousness within that immense body became ever more active. At some moment, she finally regained a bit of her capacity to think, allowing the eyes on her body to also gradually open. The surroundings were suddenly reflected in her gaze. It's noisy. Her consciousness was adrift in nothingness, surrounded by darkness without borders. Something was constantly changing her, yet she didn't have a clearer sense of reality in her sleep. She didn't know how much time had passed, as there was no concept of time in sleep. It was only that strange fluctuation that had just occurred that finally startled this confused soul awake. But her consciousness had only awakened a little, not enough to freely control her own body and power, and even less to bear the memory of the past and logical thinking. For the moment she had forgotten why she was there, even where Kirk was, and had even forgotten who she was. Millions of years blurred everything, and when it all ended, Moya, having just awakened from her slumber, was a bit out of sorts. Her somewhat muddled consciousness did not recall everything immediately. She was simply observing her surroundings instinctively, the twisted and bizarre place. Even without recalling the various events of the past, Moya still felt that the scenery before her eyes was probably somewhat different from where she used to live. Stars twinkled above, remnants of the creation of the world, impurities that were difficult for the world to digest, and now they formed layers upon layers of projections of the abyssal dimensions. A chaotic sea churned below, the true bottom of all worlds. And also the most primordial existence of Abyss Tartarus. Looking at it, a feeling of kinship mixed with rejection arose from the depths of Moya's heart. The familiarity came from the origin of her body, and the rejection from the memories in her subconscious. The ancient titans inherently did not like these, but no matter what, after thinking briefly to no avail, she let it go, because Moya's attention was quickly drawn to something even more tangible around her. Those were the 6 immeasurable colossal entities, so her subconscious told her. But Moya's currently vague thoughts were a bit confused because she couldn't feel where they were big at all. Greatness and smallness are defined by reference, but at the moment in the core of Tartarus, there was only Moya and these 6 entities. Compared to her, these demon gods could not be considered large in any way. And they don't seem to have the same consciousness as I do. It seemed she discovered something. Moya was a bit surprised, and then the answer suddenly emerged in her mind. It seemed that when it involved certain things, she didn't need to think to know the answer. Sensing the incomprehensibly understood information, Moya realized the situation in an instant. Before she awoke, there would be no second fully conscious being in the abyss. She was a special being, not only as the first life of the abyss, but also because of certain innate traits she possessed. She was immortal, but they were not. Therefore, even if the demon god's gestation was complete, it remained halted due to Moya's slumber. I am special, that's nice. Having found the answer, Moya's consciousness again let go of the doubts, a touch of joy rising in her heart, and then she began to observe these 6 fellows more meticulously. After all, they were the only beings around. So Moya opened her eyes, using her body and consciousness to examine their appearance and power in turn. Each of them was different, and the one closest to Moya looked like a huge insect. Its bloated body was covered with large and small branches, and in the position of the head, a huge human face was drawn, which added to its sense of horror. As before, when Moya saw it, the information about this life form came to mind. It was the first demon god born in Tartarus, symbolizing the growth and change of life's flesh within the abyss. Of course, this was her, the firstborn of the mother of demons. So I am the mother of demons? Then what is a demon? Her hazy mind pondered for a moment, then gave up thinking once more. Moya continued to observe the other 5 entities. The second closest to her was a giant insect, or more precisely, something like an enlarged moth, only it was clearly different from those frail creatures. The transparent wings were adorned with countless eyes, not the compound eyes of insects, but the eyes of normal animals. Dense specks covered them, even without considering the power within. this sight alone could cause someone with trypophobia to become so frightened as to lose their composure. Chapter 439. However, observing this scene, Moya had no reaction because the aura emanating from the Mother of Demons wasn't as potent as that of the other 5. Under that inexplicable knowledge ability, Moya knew it should symbolize the chaotic spirit of life in the abyss, but for some reason, the power of the demon god before her seemed somewhat vague to the Mother of Demons' perception. It doesn't matter, it has nothing to do with me. With a slight fluctuation of consciousness, Moya's attention shifted once more. The third one she looked at appeared to be normal, at least Moya felt her subconscious was somewhat quieter and no longer so vehemently resistant. It was a titan with 3 heads and 8 arms. To the sensory abilities of the Mother of Demons, each of its heads possessed different powers. One slowly corroded everything, another efficiently brought ruin to all spirits, and the final, central head could enhance itself by absorbing the power from its slaughters. Every head had its distinct attributes, but their commonality was that they all symbolized the abyss's destruction of order. Nothing special, Moya continued looking backward, the 4th and 5th ones catching her gaze simultaneously. One had dark red skin and robust limbs, with enormous flesh wings and long horns, its body engulfed in unceasing flames. The other was covered in frost and fog, its form concealed beneath, difficult to discern. That inexplicable intuition told Moya that, just like the birth of the 3rd demon god was influenced by some foreign object that appeared in the abyss, these 2 demon gods were similarly affected. One had received power from some flame kingdom, the other had merged with the essence expelled from a foggy realm. These 2 powers endowed them with abilities beyond mere abyssal traits, granting them such unique capabilities. Interesting. And the last one? Moya's gaze moved to the final demon god. Compared to the previous 5, the entity hiding at the end did not possess its body and form. It was a mass of ever-changing shadows, at times leaping, at other times silent. It seemed different from the first 5, but as curiosity arose in her heart, Moya understood once more the nature of its powers. It was of chaos and shadow, a manifestation of the imbalance in chaos's power. In this world where darkness far outweighed light, it symbolized the abyss's shadow. These are 6 peculiar fellows, as nauseating as the Hekatonkyrs. An inexplicable train of thought surfaced in Moya's mind, but although she did not suddenly know something this time, the Mother of Demons had no intention of pondering. Although she did not remember what the Hekatonkyrs were, it must be a similar entity she had once encountered. But come to think of it. So, what do I look like? This time it wasn't a thought but an actual voice. Even if Moya herself was unclear where her voice-producing organs were located, she had indeed spoken. The imagery of the 6 demon gods finally piqued the curiosity of the Mother of Demons. She wanted to see what she looked like, but upon trying, she discovered that she couldn't do so. Consciousness can't observe itself, or at least the instinct-driven Moya couldn't manage to. Realizing this, she felt somewhat dejected. Then let's wait for them to awaken. When they awake, I'll have them tell me what I look like. Not remaining dejected for long, Moya perked up again, as she had noticed that as she awakened, those 6 demons surrounding her were also finally about to acquire their full consciousness. Just as she had observed them, she decided to let them articulate her appearance. And so, as she waited, time slowly drifted by. The distorted chronology of the abyss had no standard measure, and Moya didn't know how long she had waited. Until at some moment, she suddenly realized that the weakest, and most peculiar, demon god showed signs of awakening. Its wings' myriad eyes trembled as if about to open at any moment. Thus, Moya laboriously shifted herself before it. What do I look like? At that instant, Moya spoke again, sensing that the other's consciousness had become whole. And in the next moment following her inquiry, the demon god's eyes also opened instantaneously. A million beams of light shot forth, releasing its power outward, not out of intent but as a sign of the demon god's yet unlearned control. They didn't need control, those without moral concepts would not mind if they inadvertently harmed others. Just like Moya before, the newly born demon god instinctively scanned its surroundings, its many eyes being the perfect tool. And the first thing it beheld was its creator who had nourished it, the mother of all demons of the abyss. Whoosh! A million eyes closed in an instant, followed by the flow of blood-colored liquid from the eyelids. Across from the demon god, Moya didn't even realize what had just occurred. "What's wrong?" she asked. Receiving no response, Moya only saw the other's wings vibrating, retreating backward. She was about to question this oddly behaving fellow, but in the next moment, the mother of demons was drawn to the blood flowing in the void. It was like a mirror, reflecting her appearance. Staring at the reflection in the liquid, Moya was stunned for a moment. The beauty seen by the conscious mind clashed with the utmost ugliness comprehended by the subconscious, striking her consciousness with intensity. In an instant, this extremely strong sensory shock suddenly awakened Moya's memory, and she finally remembered who she was. However, at that moment, she wished she had never remembered. I am Mnemosyne. I am the goddess of Titans. I am the god of script and innate language. I am the mother of demons. Ah! A piercing scream echoed through the abyss, violent power shaking the world. The once Titan deity finally remembered everything, but the current outcome was more than she could bear. She had come to Tartarus seeking power, and indeed she had gotten what she wanted. However, the cost was the permanent loss of everything about herself apart from that power. The abyss trembled. The newly born demon gods had not yet fully awakened when they were sent flying by Moya's power. After venting her rage, the mother of demons looked up at the very top, where the interface between the abyss and the present world lay, the gateway to the underworld. Behind that was the source of everything. Lane. Moya's succinct syllables contained anger that could not be washed away by all the waters of the four seas. If it weren't for that being who had stolen her godhood, how could she have ended up like this today? There were others too, those beings that refused to help her. They all deserved to die. She wanted to go out, to let all life in the present world taste despair and pain, but before she could start, that enlightening power from before sent another will her way, stopping her actions. Hell. Another thief? Fine. Then I will deal with you first, before I take care of the rest. In that moment, Moya profoundly understood the abyss. She knew the anger of having one's power taken away, even though Tartarus actually didn't feel anger. So she turned around, her gaze following some guidance, and saw the world hidden behind the temporal barrier. It was very similar to the former material realm, orderly and harmonious. Even now, Moya preferred such places. But she was different now. So the mother of demons shrieked again, summoning those demon gods she had just shaken out. Having sensed the will of the abyss, in this moment, she only wanted to bring total destruction to this world. The 9 hells, central courtyard. 2 suns shone from above, illuminating the figure on the floating island. The consciousness of the world serpent was there, alongside the master of the 9 hells, observing everything outside. 6 demon gods, the mother of demons, neither they nor the abyss seemed intent on concealing their tracks at this moment. She seems to be calling your name. Lane, listen, that's quite a deep grudge. Next to the familiar table and chairs, Asmodeus drank a cup of tea. However, unlike his casual tone, his facial expression was extremely serious. Chapter 440. A small sacrifice. Seated on the floating island in the courtyard, Lane and Asmodeus faced each other. For them, everything outside of hell was clearly visible, including Moya's piercing screams. However, the reverse was not true. The mother of demons could not see what was happening inside the 9 hells. This was not due to a power disparity between the two sides. In reality, the abyss held the true advantage in terms of power. The fundamental reason was that Tartarus lacked its own subjective consciousness. It didn't know to block prying eyes, so in hell, beings with divine power could see everything outside without hindrance. And since Tartarus couldn't do two things at the same time, even as it was nurturing the mother of demons and the 6 demon gods, it remained oblivious to the thief who had entered its body unannounced. As a result, for a considerable length of time in the past, the demons of hell could pass through the abyss to the mortal world, while the 9 hells ceaselessly siphoned the power that was meant for nurturing the demon gods. Nevertheless, Asmodeus was well aware that this situation likely wouldn't last much longer. The abyss had finally birthed its own life, and when Moya awoke, Hell's extraction of its origin was forcibly halted. And with the last demon god opening its eyes, Tartarus finally reacted to the foreign body within it. The chaotic sea boiled in response, and countless layers of the realm shook. It sent guidance to Moya and the demon gods, lending its power to the mother of demons, and even integrated its towering malice over Hell in an attempt to first envelop this foreign body, and then to have its own bread life shatter it. But a being without wisdom is such that it doesn't know how to conceal its intentions or prioritize its actions. So when the changes in the abyss were detected, in the concept of space and time, the position of the 9 hells began to surface. The entrance to the first layer of Hell was originally near the place where Moya was nurtured, drawing power continuously from Tartarus. But now, it moved past layer after layer of the abyss, only slowing down as it reached the outermost layer. Even from another perspective, parts of the 9 hells had already extended beyond the abyss, with only a very small area remaining intertwined with it. But that was as far as it could go, for the connection between Hell and the abyss could not be severed, they were one entity. Thus, Asmodeus wasn't trying to escape anything, he merely needed a window that connected to the mortal world rather than being locked inside by Tartarus. This was destined to be a protracted war, and even if victory came this time, the absolute disparity in power between the two sides would be difficult to change. Thus, the connection to the outside could not be cut off, only then would the 9 hells have a chance to win the ultimate victory. So Lane, how did the spirit realm manage it, from the past until now? Why have you never been treated by the mortal world in the same way? There was no apparent change in his appearance, Asmodeus still seemed very normal, but only he knew the terrible pressure he was facing at the moment. As heavy as mountains, as vast as the ocean, faced with the abyss that finally had its hands free, Hell could only navigate through the crevices at this moment, utterly incapable of resistance. Therefore, right from the beginning, Asmodeus was destined not to intervene in this battle. The pressure from the abyss exhausted him, and had the other side been conscious, the war could have been declared over before it even began. This was not surprising and still within the expectations of the Lord of the 9 hells. But if this was the case for him, the spirit realm from before should have been similarly affected. Hence, the fact that Lane had not encountered the same fate might indicate that he possessed some special means of dealing with it. If possible, Asmodeus would prefer not to use the method they had previously agreed upon to deal with his first confrontation with the abyss. Don't overthink it, you can't do it because although you were once the god of time and space, when it comes to the true heights of the temporal domain, you have actually never touched it. Even when the spirit realm was just born, as long as I didn't want to, the primordial gods couldn't lock onto me, nor could the mortal world detect me. Nyx once thought she could because she could use the authority of destiny to fix the fate of the spirit realm. But she didn't know that even if the mortal world gave her all the source power of time and space, she still couldn't touch the spirit realm's temporal essence. As for the reason, Lane gently tapped his fingers on the tabletop, not even fully clear himself about the subtle temporal divinity that came with his soul, but undoubtedly, its essence coexisted with the world. It was this power that allowed him to resist that nothingness outside the world to a certain extent and to prevent any being from touching it while the spirit realm was closed. As for the reason, it's probably innate. Being one of the most ancient deities, I've always had to have that little something special. He explained casually, but Lane had already mentioned similar content once before. He also understood that Asmodeus wasn't trying to probe for any secrets, but just wanted to express doubts about the viability of their original plan. So Lane didn't mind repeating it, giving him a bit of encouragement along the way. Chapter 441. Let's get back to the matter at hand. You don't have to worry so much. You were able to carve out a domain in the abyss because it lacks wisdom. Now, its children are the same. Just as they had thought before, aside from Moya, these first-generation demon gods did indeed possess great power. However, they also inherited the chaotic traits of the abyss. Therefore, their reasoning is very weak, at least by human standards. At most, they have a little more ability to think than the devourers roaming the spirit realm, who can distinguish friend from foe and assess the weak and the strong. Well, let's hope everything goes as usual. Nodding his head, the Lord of the Nine Hells didn't dwell on it any longer. He just watched the approaching demon gods outside the world and finally confirmed. We will win, right? Of course, but in the end, it all depends on how you define victory. Standing up, Lane responded with a smile. Then, in the next moment, the reflection of his consciousness began to fade slowly. His incarnated thoughts returned to coil around the essence in the courtyard, and those two suns flickered as well. At least, judging by how she can't get me out of her head, she truly loathes me to the bone. So, I might as well take a bit of a loss, make a little sacrifice. Don't you think? Lane's voice grew fainter as his consciousness returned, and the courtyard also quivered slightly. A colossal being started to move its stiff body, and watching all this, Asmodeus's cheeks twitched a little. Sacrifice. Yes, but no matter how you look at it, it seems that the sacrifice is not coming from the other side. But let it be. Shaking his head, the figure of the Lord of the Nine Hells disappeared as well. As long as they could win, no matter how, after all, this was already the perfect solution. The Abyss was not something they could defeat, Moya, even more so with his immortal nature, they were not enemies they could truly resolve. Thus, from the beginning of this war, his goal had never been a choice. The first layer of Hell, tumultuous void tunnel. On the dim land, the sound of air tearing and trembling was incessant. A deep blue storm swept across the sky, then collided with a burst of firelight, illuminating a stretch of the sky. This particular scene didn't happen just once, but many times over. It wasn't the result of some force, but rather a characteristic of this layer of the realm itself, caused by modifications to its underlying rules. Ever since the Titan deity became its master, the god of meteorology infused the power of his deity days into this realm. In making it stronger, he also inevitably altered its foundational laws. From that day forth, storms ravaged the mountains and plains, their clamorous noise never ceasing. The environment of the entire realm slowly shifted in a certain direction, and in recent millennia, it even underwent further changes. The Abyss absorbed fire and frost mist, and thus spawned demon gods with corresponding powers, along with realms filled with lava and cold streams. Of course, Hell also gained its portion. To better resist the upcoming war, Asmodeus generously infused his share of the profits into the first realm layer. Hence, Cryas's power surged, and firelight and frost flickered within the tumultuous void tunnel. So, although this world had no sun, it was never short of light. Flames spontaneously born from the void lit up the entire world, extinguished by storms or dancing with it. From a higher vantage point, countless points of light could be seen spinning and rising, giving warmth and light to this dim realm. Of course, with the birth of flame and cold stream, the storms became more fierce. The collision of cold and heat made the currents more unpredictable, rendering this world a place where only life beneath the ground could persist. Layers of tunnels and cavities were thus excavated, emitting sharp cries under the fierce winds on the surface, one of the reasons behind the name, tumultuous void tunnel. But that was during normal times. Currently, the first layer of Hell was devoid of life. Not long ago, the devils here had orderly evacuated to the upper worlds under the command of their lord. Clearly, the clash between Tartarus and the Nine Hells was not something in which they could partake. This time, they didn't even qualify as spectators. Thus, the boundless realm stood empty, save for at the highest point, where Cryas held a great sword, and gazed solemnly at his world. This place was about to become a battlefield, and he was the only warrior. It's always a fight against overwhelming odds. I wonder when he'll change this situation. He didn't voice it aloud, but Cryas couldn't help feeling speechless. Whether above ground or below, he never seemed to experience the feeling of having strength in numbers. Fortunately, his power had grown stronger than in the past. Although at the beginning of his rebirth, this Titan deity had once lost the strength of his divine power, only maintaining the old view through the support of the realm. But after Hell's tens of thousands of years absorbing the power of the Abyss, he had arduously returned to his original domain. Even now, as a being with the traits of a territorial god standing in the tumultuous void tunnel, Cryas felt far superior to his past. The entire realm was one with him, and here, he felt he could face more than one peer. Chapter 442. The only unfortunate part was that Crius suddenly realized that not only was each of his future enemies no weaker than he was now, but there were also 6 of them. As for his teammates, Crius glanced at Mephisto next to him. No matter how he looked at him, the other party didn't seem like someone who could fight well. Why are you the only one here? Where's the god you brought into hell, and the other guy, the one? Hypnos? Where did he go? Frowning, Crius was somewhat dissatisfied. Although they hadn't interacted much, he had to admit that the divine power of the god of sleep was indeed very powerful, even stronger than his. According to Hypnos, this was after he had lost the domain of sleep, otherwise, he would have been almost at the pinnacle of the true god's realm. This revelation somewhat shocked Crius, for Hypnos had been virtually unknown in the mortal realm. But after thinking about it, he found it not so surprising. After all, such was the world of chaos, where death was ridiculously weak, but sleep had taken its place because, in this world, the most dreadful fate for a god was not death but eternal slumber. Therefore, it was only natural that the authority of the god of sleep was strong. Of course, perhaps it was this very strength that led to his overconfident rebellion. Regardless of the reason, it didn't concern Crius. He was just dissatisfied now because it seemed the other party had no intention of cooperating. He doesn't think hiding in his own little world will be of any use, does he? Crius snorted coldly, gripping his sword hilt, or does he think that the Lord of the Nine Hells won't settle accounts for his desertion? Before coming here, Asmodeus had clearly told him that the Lord of the third layer of Hell would help him restrain at least 2 demon gods. But now, he had no idea where the man was. Don't worry, Crius, he must have already arrived. As long as he wants to stay in Hell, he cannot defy the unanimous command of the 2 rulers. From beside him, Mephisto in mid-air was not in a hurry. As for where? The greatest use of his authority is not direct combat. However, I believe he will put in the effort. Unlike Crius, who was tense, Mephisto was actually enjoying the unique scenery of the noisy empty tunnel. Behind this distinctive environment lay the visible power of the lord of this layer, something he did not yet possess. Even though he had suddenly become a great lord of Hell, and even temporarily granted jurisdiction over the second layer of Hell due to the war, one problem still lay before him. Unlike his partner Crius, who might be considered bringing capital into the partnership, Mephisto was purely a high-level employee. Everything he possessed was because he could still create value for the Lord of the Nine Hells. But no value is permanent, and the longest-lasting value is to transform oneself into that value itself, like Crius and his meteorological origin. Indeed, disaster is the ladder to ascend. The destruction of humanity brought me to where I am today, and the invasion of the abyss is for a better tomorrow for us. With a pensive look, Mephisto smiled and said. So, looking on the bright side, perhaps after today, the noisy empty tunnel will grow stronger fed by the nourishment of demon gods' flesh and blood? Only if you are still alive tomorrow, human, Crius responded coldly. And I hope you remember, remnant of the Silver Age, I am immortal, but you are not. Leaving behind a cold laugh, wrapped in a hurricane, Crius leapt into the air. Behind him, Mephisto watched his retreating figure with an unchanged smile. He knew that as an innate deity, Crius never really looked up to him. Or rather, almost all gods disliked seeing mortals gradually become their equals, which was quite normal. But as common as it might be, there are plenty of normal things in this world. Like now, the key to determining the outcome of the war was never in the hands of Crius. Silver humanity. You are right, Mephisto said. Retrieving a silver mirror from the void, looking at the divine artifact granted temporarily to him, Mephisto continued to wait. Until at one moment, a thunderous roar came from the edge of space, shaking the whole world. Boom! Gazing up slightly, Mephisto knew that the gates of hell had been opened. Chapter 443, Whittling Away. Thud. 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 In the chaotic temporal space, there hadn't been any so-called portals, but when the forces of 2 worlds collided, it seemed as if it became visible along with them. Both originated from the same source and were mutually opposing and repelling, yet behind that repulsion was a mutual attraction. So, when Hell's Gate was in front of her, Moya didn't hesitate to charge at it. Thud. The dull impact sound brought with it a spray of blood, but the slight pain instead aroused a certain ferocity in Moya. It was hard to say if she was influenced by the chaotic power of the abyss, but she didn't seem to be an overly intelligent deity to begin with. From the moment she realized her current situation, the mother of demons developed an insatiable desire for destruction. She wanted to destroy something, whether it was someone else or herself. Clang. Crack. She couldn't remember how many times she had collided, until at a certain moment, Moya felt as if she had broken through something, passing through some barrier, and arrived somewhere else. The power of the nine hells began to suppress her, but the world that was fully resisting the abyss didn't have much power to spare. It was more of a reminder to Moya that she had entered. So, shaking her body a bit, the mother of demons regained some sanity. She began to observe her surroundings with the tiny pupils hidden beneath her indescribable form and sensed the breath of the entire hell. Looking down from the sky, within a darkened world, countless points of light flickered into and out of existence, adding a spectacular color to this realm. The shrieking sounds, either sharp or heavy, incessantly echoed, as if an incompetent orchestra was playing, making Moya somewhat bothered. But that wasn't the most critical issue. The mother of demons' gaze moved to a deeper layer of temporal space. As the only being currently qualified to bear a portion of Abyss's power, Moya temporarily received a bit of extra care from it. Although the conditions for using this care were stringent and limited because she couldn't become the king of the Abyss, and it only worked when facing the enemies of Tartarus, it still allowed her to detect the distribution of powers within Hell. Besides the world itself that was fighting against Tartarus, only the middle position had the strength to rival hers at this moment. As for other places, only a few were somewhat stronger beings. But it didn't matter, because the Abyss had more numbers. Thus, even with no great battle wisdom, Moya quickly determined the best course of action. She would entangle the threatening being, and then the other demon gods would destroy this world. Of course, all this was predicated on the assumption that this world could withstand the struggle between her and that foreign existence. Without further hesitation, the mother of demons stretched out her body, emitting a long and piercing cry. Ah! The sound reverberated through the noisy space, also reaching beyond this realm, as Moya was calling the demon gods born along with her. These beings lacking in reason could not communicate normally, but fortunately, Moya didn't need to waste words with them. Her voice carried but one consciousness, to destroy everything before her. Boom! The next moment, without waiting for their response, Moya once again collided with her full body, charging into the depths of the world. The first layer of the world was pierced without resistance, but in the crevices of the 9 realms, a black shadow suddenly flashed by. Without time to react, Moya was once again cast into the ground of the noisy space tunnel. The force continued, sending her through the Earth's layers until she fell out of the 9 hells and struck against the body of an 8-armed, 3-headed titan. Flesh tore and then healed, and with a mere shake of her body, Moya stood up again. At the end of her gaze, she saw the one who had attacked her. Rising from nothingness, crawling through space-time, a massive snake head protruded from the interdimensional plane. Its blood-red eyes were fixed on the demons, not hiding the murderous intent within. However, at this sight, Moya let out a sharp laugh, showing no anger from the attack. Good, very good. Since you don't want to fight me inside, then come outside. Although regardless of where, the outcome awaiting you will be no different. Fighting here actually aided the display of her powers more. As for the potential damage to some layers of the abyss, neither Moya nor Tartarus really cared too much. In comparison, the significances of a few demon gods were somewhat greater. They at least indeed represented some aspect of the abyss's authority. If something happened to them, that would be a significant issue. So without any fancy moves and still lacking any knowledge of other tactics, she charged at her opponent in the same primitive way as before. It might look somewhat foolish, but it was the most effective method. She didn't need to do anything else. From now on, Moya just had to ensure that her opponent was too overwhelmed to care about anything else. At the junction connecting the abyss and hell, at the entrance to the first layer of hell. Unlike the turbulence outside, this place still seemed somewhat calm. After all, even the demon gods passing through here didn't stay long, instead following an indistinct call toward the depths of the world. So now, only one guy was left here, who intended to lay low but unexpectedly stumbled upon a ticking bomb. Chapter 444. Hiss, truly, beyond my comprehension. The slight tremble of his body, the gray wings on his back all drooped. Hypnos, hidden at the entrance of the realm, seemed to have been struck by some powerful impact and for a moment was unable to react. Therefore, he almost passively watched the first 4 demon gods birthed by the mother of demons enter the bustling void tunnel before him, without managing to make any response. Really bad luck. His mouth twitched slightly, unsure how to comprehend the situation. Actually, if he had run into an opponent he couldn't defeat, he might have understood that much, but the experience he had just endured was truly hard to evaluate. After all, strictly speaking, he had actually done nothing just now but looked, out of curiosity, at the gigantic life form that had burst into the 9 hells. And now, he deeply regretted it. The flash of a giant creature, the intense mental shock, it wasn't just some indescribable phenomenon on the surface, but more a conceptual definition. Having appeared in the dreams of the gods many times, Hypnos had seen the figure of the goddess of beauty on Mount Olympus, and indeed, Aphrodite was as her godhood dictated. No matter who you were, no matter your gender, whether you liked her or not, you would be captivated by her beauty under the influence of her inherent authority. You could dislike her character, question her abilities, but you must admit, she was someone whose presence was pleasing to the eye, a stark contrast to Moya. At that moment, Hypnos was quite certain that the mother of demons was most likely granted an opposite power by the abyss, and it was probably enhanced. Because on her, there was also the natural repulsion of order against chaos. In any case, under various influences, her figure seemed to have some mystical effect. Although it didn't cause any direct damage, it was a bit more terrifying than if it had. With just a moment's gaze, the god of sleep felt he would not forget her for 10,000 years to come. He had no doubt that if this disgusting creature didn't think of some way to conceal itself in the future, no one would want to communicate with her. At this time, Hypnos didn't know that he wasn't the first victim. The demon god of 1,000 eyes and thoughts had seen her the moment it was born and promptly destroyed its own eyes. But even when a new pair grew back, it was still meaningless. The impact on the spirit, naturally, was not affected by the physical body, so its instinctual reaction was just futile. Here it comes. After a moment, the god of sleep finally shifted his attention back to serious matters. He had already let 4 through. If there were issues with the last 2 as well, that would be a bit inexcusable. Regardless, at this point, he was a contracted worker relying on the hospitality of others, so Hypnos forced himself to be spirited. Under his gaze, after a short while, the void trembled again, and a dark blue mist seeped from it. Just like at the moment of its birth, the mist concealed the newcomer's form, hiding the true appearance of the demon god and making it difficult for others to pinpoint its exact location. And the seemingly beautiful mist actually contained an extremely horrifying toxicity, enough to turn any who approached into withered bones. This was a power not found in the Chaos world. It originated from the source of frost power, a primeval fountain from a certain realm. The original fountain, known alongside the Well of Ord and Mimir's Well, didn't have many effects. Its terrifying toxicity was its most notable feature. And now, it seemed that this trait was partly inherited by the demon god that carried its power, becoming the best barrier surrounding it. But it doesn't matter. I never planned on getting close to you. Something with not much wisdom is not hard to deal with at all. He reached out and a dark purple flute fell into his hand. This divine artifact that was born with him had not abandoned him as he fell into hell. Hypnos brought it to his lips, and a melodious tune immediately filled the world, despite the howling hurricane. The violent winds did not interfere with its effects, for the music of the god of sleep was not meant for ears to listen to. His power traveled unhindered along with the melody into the mist, and at the same time, gray feathers fell from his wings, drifting across the void towards the other side. Visible to the naked eye, the moving blue mist slowly came to a halt, though the fog around it grew even denser. It seemed to possess some sort of instinct, which allowed it to protect itself during sleep, but even so, Hypnos had no intention of doing any harm to it. His power was not dominant in direct combat. Despite having knocked down the opponent with one move just now, if a real fight ensued, even with the upper hand, the outcome was uncertain. Compared to the native lifeforms transformed by Hel, Hypnos was not keen on the power of abyssal demon lords. Rather than pondering whether he could solve the problem once and for all, it was more meaningful to control one more of them. Cryas, right? Since you're undead anyway, 2 more hits it is then. That's how it was on the ground, and it seems you've always played the role of a punching bag, even among the stars. Watching the void surge again, a shadow slinked out, and Hypnos silently thought to himself. He had seen that scene in a few dreams of the gods of stars, the meteorological titan beaten mercilessly by the ancient god of sun. That was a nightmare for many gods of stars. After all, they still remembered how many of their kind perished during that time. Their survival to this day was purely luck. Therefore, it was conceivable that in this respect, Cryas was very experienced. Shadow. There's no difference. Once again blowing his flute with practiced ease, Hypnos immobilized the last demon god and relaxed, even taking the time to observe this unique individual. It was not just the outward difference that struck the god of sleep, he had even sensed that this one had more reasoning than the previous few. Of course, that was meaningless. Whether slightly smarter or dumber, neither affected being influenced by his power. And once they fell into deep sleep, waking up would not be easy. Lucky one. After observing for a while, Hypnos no longer dwelled on it. Even after falling into hell, the god of sleep still bore the appearance of a youth, which inevitably gave a sense of a dark fairy tale amidst such a setting. Turning around, he looked deeper into the realm, where battles were also about to erupt within the noisy spatial tunnels. The invading demon gods were brazenly attempting to collapse this world, and its masters clearly could not tolerate such behavior. Although their power was insufficient to destroy the fabric of spacetime that carried the world itself, their goal was not for such. Once they exterminated the life on this plane and occupied its center, then spread their own influence across the sky and the ground, this place would gradually bear the mark of the abyss. When this mark was completed, Tartarus would then be able to use it as an anchor to send its force accurately here, rather than playing a game of hide and seek with the 9 hells across the layers of spacetime. Slowly eroding, then deciding the outcome when the big picture was almost set, this was the process of the struggle between hell and the abyss. Just as chaos had worn down the resistance of Hemenu world over a long period, collisions between worlds were not to be solved overnight. Mutual devouring. Truly primordial and aesthetically pleasing. Sitting amidst the void, his feathers continuously falling and regrowing, Hypnos commented lightly. Although he was there in person, the innate evil god could hardly be said to have any empathy. So now, he was just fulfilling his most basic task, then waiting here, watching as this wind-filled world slowly burned. Chapter 445, The Curse. To say that Hypnos watched the world burn is not a poetic description but an actual depiction of the first layer of hell. Although the noisy wind tunnels that crisscrossed through rocks and stones had nothing that could serve as fuel, the transcendent world does not adhere to the laws of physics. At this moment, with the invasion of the demon gods, the whole world erupted in turbulence. It was an attraction and opposition between origins, a resonance from the same power that emanated from Muspelheim, the country of flames. Therefore, the relevant laws of the realm were excited, causing a red hue to suffuse the relentless hurricane. Crackle. The great sword scraped against the phosphorus armor with a grating sound, but it was quite clear that the attack failed to pierce through this innate defense. The fruitless strike was followed by no time for further action as Cryas couldn't help but change his expression and immediately dissipated into formless mist, dispersing into the void around him. The next moment, a dark red shadow pierced through, turning the mist into nothingness as it passed. Its unstoppable momentum carried it to the land behind. Almost visibly to the naked eye, the ground and rocks at the impact site crumbled into the finest dust, then vanished without a trace with the wind. The mist coalesced, and feeling his divine body slightly weakened, Crius had no time to marvel at the power of the demon gods, as he again retreated. In the next instant, a bloated, segmented worm leaped from the ground, the human face on its top contorting into a greedy grin as it lunged toward the entity in the sky. Perhaps the body was too massive, perhaps it lacked profound combat wisdom, or maybe it was because of a disparity in authority, but under Crius's evasion, they should have passed each other by, if his opponent had nothing more to say. But reality holds no ifs. In the distance, although a crack was plainly visible on its translucent wings, the colossal moth still spread its wings wide, and with it, a myriad of eyes also opened. In an instant, a flood of chaotic emotions surged into Crius's heart, disregarding the barrier of time and space. Fear, panic, anger, envy, deceit. They combined in various proportions, contained in every eye of the demon god's countless gazes. When they opened simultaneously, they coalesced into millions of new emotions that together infiltrated Crius's heart, causing the once titan deity to stumble in his movements, his will falling into a state of chaos. Thus, in an instant, the leaping worm closed in on its target, its facial expressions on the body becoming even more sinister. At the moment of contact, the human face seemed to take a severe breath, and it could be seen that Crius's divine body instantly shriveled. Hiss, back off. A sense of emptiness rose from the depths, awakening Crius, who was still being bombarded with emotions. Instinctively slashing with his sword, he easily tore a huge wound through the worm's body. But this was of little significance, as the opponent's body visibly recovered. Meanwhile, not only did a second ray of light infused with different powers come hurtling through the air, but a demon wreathed in flames also rushed toward him, wielding a chain sword. Damn! Cursing, Crius could only meet the advance with his sword. Although he was not a match, he wouldn't be completely defeated in a moment. After all, for an immortal primordial deity, unless one burned oneself like the ancient god of sun, or was tainted by a higher level of power, ordinary injuries were not fatal to a god and did not require much time to heal gradually. As long as the power hadn't run dry, even if attacked thousands of times, he could still fully recover. Swish. Avoiding the sharp edge of the sword, dodging the incoming rays of light, and barely boosting his spirits by self-inflicted harm, Crius raised his great sword, aiming for the head of the demon god. This place lacked the thick phosphorus armor, maybe it could actually inflict some damage. The best defense is offense, a lesson he learned from participating in numerous godly battles. As the sword fell, Crius allowed himself a small measure of bitter joy, finally able to wound the demon wrapped in the fires of destruction. However, no sooner had the thought formed when the ensuing scene made his eyes widen and his form retreat explosively. Perhaps sensing that it was about to be struck, the demon god didn't show fear but rather its eyes gleamed with intensified brutality and murderous intent. Engulfed in battle, its body was already ruled by instinct, so it bore down on the sword edge and charged forward. The body began to disintegrate, flesh and blood combusting, with the demon making no attempt to evade the enemy's attack but rolling into a ball, throwing itself onto the adversary, and then exploding beside Crius with a mighty blast in his horror-stricken gaze. Boom! The self-detonation of a demon god raised at the sun, in the dark and tumultuous tunnel, endless light and heat illuminating the vast land, and the tremendous roar and shaking shook the whole world. As the blast occurred, the tunnels and cavities mined under the land for millennia vanished into nothing, and beneath the explosion site, billions of tons of earth turned into lakes of magma, then vaporized the next moment. Even at the edges of the realm, Hypnos couldn't help but be alarmed by this power and increased the output of his energy to barely prevent the two demon gods from awakening from their slumber. In the center of the explosion, Crius, despite his best efforts to escape, was left with nothing but skeletal remnants and a few pieces of internal organs on his divine body. Chapter 446. They continued to proliferate, then were ignited by the flames that overflowed in the space, subjecting the once great Titan deity to tortures akin to 1,000 cuts and slices. He wanted to scream out his agony, but Crius found himself now unable to even make a sound. Facing the four demon gods alone, Crius had long known he was no match for them, so all he aimed to do was to buy enough time. That's why he chose to experience their powers one by one from the outset. The first opponent he chose was the demon god, symbolizing the life and change of the abyss. However, just like its power, although the owner of the boisterous hollow easily tore through the flesh of the worms, his injuries were meaningless. This was quite normal. Aside from a few authorities, any existence when confronted with something tied to life often found themselves at a loss. Thus, after only a brief encounter and having taken a few blows, Crius decisively shifted his target. Since the first was unsuitable for an offensive target, the second one he chose was the Thousand-Eye Demon God. Its aura was clearly weaker than the others, and this time the attack did have some effect. The body was fragile, its healing speed not so swift. With just one stroke, Crius left a scratch on its wing. But soon, Crius again switched his target. He realized in horror that the moment the eyes on its body were damaged, the demon god would burst forth with emotional turmoil many times stronger, rendering him stiff and unable to move. This was thanks to some flaw in its power, otherwise, it would have been more than just temporary stiffness. The chaotic gods were always lacking resistance to such powers. Had the Thousand-Eye Demon God possessed sufficient emotions, but lacked consciousness, Crius' fate would have been even worse. In this battle, he was already striving to conserve his strength through his authority and reason, and this kind of hard control attack was undoubtedly the last thing he wanted to encounter. So, after weighing his options, Crius firmly set his sights on the third demon god, that three-headed, eight-armed giant. During the previous clashes, he had been observing his surroundings and had thought he finally found an easy target, because Crius discovered that the three heads of the demon god seemed to have different thoughts, all equally chaotic. They often interfered with one another, acting in self-contradictory manners, at best projecting beams of light from the eyes on their foreheads that contained different powers to attack the enemy. However, the moment it was truly about to be injured, the three consciousnesses united rapidly and instinctively, beginning to fight the enemy recklessly, without regard for consequences. So after taking a few more losses, Crius once again changed his target and looked at the demon enveloped in flames. Regarding the three-headed giant, perhaps the threat would be smaller if left unattended. The last one, and the one Crius had least wanted to face before the battle, was the demon god whose appearance was closest to the demons of later ages. Not only did it have heavy phosphorus armor, but it also wielded a massive chain sword. That was a true divine artifact, far from being comparable to the lesser weapon in Crius' hands. And indeed, his apprehension was proven right, for he dared not even face the demon's sword edge, yet he couldn't breach the demon's phosphorus armor at all. However, compared to the other three, Crius still felt the one before him was somewhat more suitable for a main attack. At least he could exchange a few blows with it, and the demon god clearly lacked experience in wielding weapons. That was until the world-shaking explosion occurred, leaving him in his current state. Looking at the far-off demon god whose aura had fallen sharply but who remained ferocious and insane, Crius had no doubt that if he dared approach, the demon could gift him a self-destruct at any moment. Had this been a one-on-one fight, he would not have hesitated to confront such a move that killed 800 enemies at the cost of 3,000 selves, but now he had 4 enemies. "Damn you, Mephisto, where the hell have you gone?" He roared and then flew away in retreat. Although one of the enemies had entered a period of weakness post-ultimate ability, it didn't mean the others were affected. It seemed that a head-on battle was utterly meaningless. So within the first layer of hell, and with more severity than when he faced Hyperion, Crius could only dodge everywhere, as new wounds accumulated upon his body. He didn't know what the turning point would be, but clearly, if he didn't want the demon gods to freely contaminate his domain, leaving behind the deep-seated powers of the abyss difficult to eradicate even after the battle, he had to hold on a little longer. And for a being of a deity's caliber, this little longer was not going to be a short span of time. Mortal Realm, the palace of King Eryxis. Snow filled the skies. At this moment in the mortal realm, no one knew what demons and devils were, not even the existence of Tartarus existed except in certain legends. The people were engrossed in the joy of the harvest, admiring the snowy landscape they had never seen before. This had just appeared this year, also signifying that the concept of winter had further solidified. Perhaps it was because of Demeter's prior anger, or perhaps the time had truly come. Either way, the weather was changing again. And during this time, Demophon had been buried by the royal couple on a small mountain away from the city. The king did not dare bury him near the goddess, so this was his only choice. Chapter 447. After this, Demophon's eldest brother, Triptolemos, was once again sent to the abode of the goddess by Clitius. However, this time, when they arrived, no one dared to lift their heads and look directly at Demeter. They all gazed at the ground, displaying their humility to the deity walking among them in the mortal realm. That day, the king thought he would once again receive news of his eldest son's death, and Triptolemos shared this belief. Yet, when faced with the choice given by his father, he still chose to come. Unexpectedly, Demeter did not go back on her word. She kept her promise and granted the young child the glory closest to that of a god. At this place where the former king had once resided, the goddess imparted to Triptolemos the secrets of agriculture, which were both the accumulation and summary of the past generations of humans, as well as the processes deduced from results by Demeter herself. This knowledge included not only the growth of grains and the methods of cultivation, but even spanned the changing of celestial patterns and geology, breeding and selection of grain varieties, and the laws of climate among other crystallizations of wisdom. This knowledge was complex and profound, and much of it was understood in its effects but not in its causes. Yet the vague explanations by the goddess were inevitably misinterpreted by mortals. They believed it was simply because they could not comprehend the wisdom of the gods, and as they gradually unraveled the mysteries behind it, their praise for the greatness of the gods grew even more fervent. Furthermore, Demeter also bestowed upon Triptolemos the privilege to wield sacred power, and after he mastered all knowledge, she appointed him as her chief shepherd in the mortal realm. Humans herd cattle and sheep to obtain meat and milk, while deities herd humans to garner faith and pleasure. Therefore, the existence closest to the gods among humans is naturally the chief of those shepherds who herd on behalf of the gods. From that day forth, Eleusis, situated on the edge of the human lands, became the first kingdom in the mortal realm to worship Demeter exclusively. People built temples to honor the goddess in various places, regarding her as the principal god of harvest and agriculture, because it was also from that day on that, with the help of the divine arts of the priesthood led by Triptolemos, Eleusis regained its abundant harvest, allowing the nation to be rejuvenated. The goddess thus gained immense reputation among mortals, and because of Triptolemos's unique status, there were no internal conflicts within the kingdom. He was both the future king and the earthly proxy of the goddess, so just like Silver Moon City, the political and religious elements united into one. Without any conflicts of interest and with the deity in close proximity, it naturally returned to the fast track of development. Everyone was immersed in joy, and even the king put aside his resentment while he reminisced about his youngest child. After all, things were good now, and rather than holding a grudge against an invincible enemy for a lifetime, it was better to temporarily let go. It was a reluctant decision, the wisdom of the weak seeking survival. In any case, the events of that night seemed to have passed just like that. No one in the palace spoke of it, and the common folk outside were even less likely to know what had happened. No one spoke of the prince who died young, as if he had never existed. The people simply sang praises of the goddess's greatness and enjoyed the long-awaited harvest. Only Metaneira was not like this. That night, Demeter's aloof pronouncement still echoed in the queen's dreams, and the manner of her young son's death was vivid in her mind. In Metaneira's heart, there was no letting go, only a mortal's curse upon a deity. Unfortunately, in this world, a curse without power is nothing at all. Chapter 448. Poseidon, who was accidentally targeted. In the palace of Eryxis, where the queen resided. In the cold winter, snowflakes drifted down, landing on the rooftop and the ground. The chilly wind outside and the burning fire inside created a convection, stirring up breezes. Through the window, Metaneira could see the guards outside. They were the elite warriors of the kingdom, second-order fighters who not only possessed extraordinary strength, immune to heat and cold, but could also temporarily enhance themselves with the energy within their bodies. They could march 100 miles wearing heavy armor or triumph over common beasts with their bare hands. In this era, they were almost considered reserves for the high echelons of Eryxis, and after centuries of development, this high echelon might even be replaced by aristocrats. Thus, having them as guards was originally a symbol of status. But the queen knew that they were not there to protect her. On the contrary, they were there to protect the flourishing kingdom from being destroyed by her. And all this was because of Metanira's resentment towards the goddess of agriculture. Everyone forgot the existence of the little prince, or rather, many commoners were never aware of the full story, but the queen was not willing to forget. Everyone was grateful for the presence of the goddess, for she made natural disasters less fearsome. But the queen was equally unwilling to be thankful. Even when Metanira saw the citizens of Eryxis showing gratitude towards Demeter, she still tried to tell them the truth behind it. All she didn't expect understanding from the people, but at least they should remember that Demophon died because of it, and his name should not be forgotten in silence. And from that day on, the queen was taken back to the palace. Clearly, although Demeter herself had already cast aside the memory of that dead child and did not wish to recall that failed creation, others dared not let the stain of the goddess be spread. King Caius also gradually had some suspicions about the whole incident. The goddess certainly acted capriciously, treating mortals like ants, but if her ants did not interfere with her affairs, then Demeter actually wouldn't do much. This was the disdain of a deity for mortals, just as humans scorn livestock. Upon realizing this, King Caius's suppressed pain was not erased, but he inevitably let go of some worries. At least he understood that as long as he complied with the will of the goddess in all things, the same disaster would not befall his eldest son again. Under these circumstances, he naturally would not allow any accidents to happen, nor would he allow Metanira's speech to affect the deity's image in the eyes of the people and thereby shake the faith in the goddess. So even though he understood the queen's sorrow, he still coldly confined her to her own palace. He thought time would heal all wounds and that his attention to his eldest son and family would gradually make Metanira let go of her unrealistic notions. After all, the dead cannot be brought back, and the living must go on. However, clearly, Caius did not know that for some people, the status of the living could never overcome that of the dead. So on this day, as night fell, the queen sent away all the maids who came to care for her, or rather, to simply prevent her from committing an act of blasphemy. She covered the windows with a curtain and then took out a box of finely crafted incense. It was the result of 2 months of hard work by Metanira, made with special recipes. 4 parts frankincense, myrrh, and 2 parts styrax. 1 part cedar and ginger, paired with half a part orris, cardamom, cinnamon, juniper, iris flower, and bay laurel, plus 7 dried grapes, a few drops of nectar, honey, and lotus fragrance. Just for these ingredients alone, if she had not been the queen, she would have had no chance of gathering them all. With the ingredients in hand, she processed them according to different chronological rituals. She ground the herbs, let them sit sealed for 2 weeks, then mixed them with essential oils, nectar, grapes, and once more let them sit. After a month of waiting, she finally turned the finished product into incense sticks, stored in a small box. It is said that such incense could communicate with the deity, at least that's what the gods said. So now, Metanira took it out and carefully lit it. The flame flickered for a moment, and then a faint mist wafted around the room, dissipating into nothingness after extending a certain distance. It seemed to carry the queen's will to some unknowable place, bearing her certain intent. Minutes and seconds passed, the night grew increasingly deep. Until midnight, as the incense was about to burn out, the void in front of Metanira's expectant gaze finally trembled slightly. Soon, under the flickering candlelight, 2 figures that could be considered small appeared and solidified gradually. They looked like children of about 10 years old, but the queen's eyes held only caution and longing as she looked at them. "It seems you have made your preparations," said the boy, taking the lead, followed closely by the girl. "You must choose one of us." Looking at the mortal before them, Volos and Eros spoke dispassionately. "Now, make your choice. This is your only chance in life to take revenge on a god." In the queen's bedchamber, the conversation continued. This was not their first meeting. In fact, soon after Metanira had been confined to the palace, she had already encountered these 2 childlike gods. Chapter 449. In a simple demonstration, 2 children no more than 10 years old released a golden arrow that made a resolute guard fall passionately in love with a rock, treating it as his sole companion. This terrifying spectacle not only sent chills down the queen's spine but also convinced her of the visitors' identities. In the simple belief system of the people of chaos, influencing a person's thoughts is far more terrifying than killing a person's body. With hardly any doubt, Metanira concluded that the newcomers were deities more powerful than Demeter. And through a brief conversation with them, the queen understood their intentions. They were willing to assist her in her revenge, to inflict retribution on the goddess of agriculture, or rather, helping her achieve her vengeance would serve their purposes, which is why they had come. A golden arrow could inspire irresistible love, a lead arrow could generate intolerable hatred. They laid the two arrows before the queen, allowing her to choose one and then decide on a target. Of course, the target had to be related to her quest for vengeance. I want to know. Can you bring Demophon back to life? Amid the smoke rising from the incense, the queen asked with hope in her voice. Although she had long contemplated revenge against Demeter, she would rather resurrect her child if possible. That was far more meaningful than revenge. However, the two deities, looking like young teenagers, shook their heads together before replying one after the other. Although I would like to say, even if we could, we would not agree. Because we are not here to fulfill your wishes. But in fact, we indeed cannot do that. As if they were of one mind, their alternating words carried no sense of division. Watching the queen's gaze turn from hope to despair, Volos and Eros continued. Because his spirit has also perished. At least it has not returned to the spirit realm. Divine power can accomplish this. And nobody would call her to account for an individual case. Now, make your choice, this is your only chance. X2. The last phrase, their overlapping voices echoing in the room, carried a hint of reverberation. As hope died in the queen's heart, the flames of hatred burned even more fiercely. During her days of de facto captivity, Metanira also reflected on everything that transpired that night. Her child was killed, and perhaps her interruption was a factor, but the essence of the matter was the deity's haughty attitude. Demeter had never truly poured her emotions into Demophon, not much, if any. She had merely seen Demophon as her perfect creation and then, as a matter of course, sought to destroy this flawed creation. Therefore, the greatest punishment for such a being was to have her give birth to a truly shameful progeny that would bring her eternal disgrace. I choose the golden arrow, Prince Volos. Clenching her fist, the queen said each word deliberately. I want you to direct it at the ugliest existence among the gods, then let him conceive a possessive emotion for Demeter. I want them to give birth to an equally ugly child. There are no ugly true gods, Metanira. Even the most ordinary-looking true god is hard to describe as ugly. Unaware of the existence of Hephaestus, Volos carrying the golden arrow denied the queen's statement. Then I demand the god with the most bizarre tastes, the one with a cruel and unbearable disposition. Grinding her teeth, Metanira even glanced at Eros beside her. Or more precisely, at the lead arrow he carried. If you could shoot her with an arrow and make her genuinely detest that god. That is also impossible, you do not possess that ability. Eros dismissed it offhandedly, his expression somewhat disinterested. Our arrows draw strength from revenge and cannot simply be shot without cause. If you were a deity, the hatred from the killing of your child would indeed suffice to wield both arrows, and their effects would be extraordinary. But unfortunately, you are just a mortal. So no matter how great your hatred is, you can only make one effective, and its impact will not be permanent. Remaining silent, the queen finally calmed down a bit after being rebuffed repeatedly. She looked at the twins before her, and an inexplicable sense of grief and indignation surged within her. Again, just like how Demeter had once looked down on her as if she were nothing, these two deities who had come to assist her were essentially the same. They merely saw her as a tool. But perhaps she had long stopped caring about her own life, so watching them, Metanira couldn't help but remark sarcastically. So why did you bother appearing before me? Do the gods need assistance from mortals? Heh. With a disdainful laugh, Eros paid no attention to the queen's words. Trivial mortals, pointless emotions. Of course, they might mean something to her, but Eros had no interest in understanding. She drew a golden arrow from her twin brother's back and tossed it before the queen. The hatred in the other's heart didn't escape her perception, so she was sure that the queen would not give up no matter what. "We will satisfy you," drench the arrow with your blood, harboring a heart of vengeance. "Once you have done this, we will carry out the latter part. What happens next is up to you." Hiss. The golden arrow pierced the queen's chest, but she seemed not to feel the pain. Blood gushing from her chest soaked the arrow, seemingly awakening the power contained within it. Chapter 450. A strong hatred flashed in Metanira's eyes, not just toward Demeter, but against all the gods present. However, facing her, the twin deities of desire were merely shocked for a moment, then regarded the whole affair with indifference. Her readiness to use her own life to demonstrate her resolve, possibly also because her husband and son had knelt before their enemies, led her to relinquish hope in life. Yet the joy and sorrow of gods and mortals do not intersect. The twins found her actions laughable. What could she prove? Nothing at all. Her actions, aside from moving herself and saddening her loved ones for a moment, accomplished nothing. Bang! "Remember what you promised me." Fallen to the ground, the queen's voice was intermittent, eventually fading into nothingness. When the room returned to silence, Volos stepped forward to pick up the golden arrow, then flicked off the excess blood. The twins saw it clearly. When Metanira's life departed, her soul left her body and entered the underworld. She would follow the Styx River into the all-spirit realm, where her memories would be washed away, and then she would be reborn. This was precisely why the twins found the situation amusing. After all, even such fervent hatred had no significance in the face of the world's law. By the time she arrived at the River of Oblivion before the Well of Reincarnation, those heartfelt memories would have long since been blown away by the wind. So about the candidate, what about Poseidon? Looking at Eros, who could have been either his sister or his brother, Volos offhandedly suggested. He had heard of this god before, and it was said that his tastes were a bit different from regular gods. The spirit realm had already received many souls of his demigod offspring. And the forms of those demigods were, in a word, very unique. That undoubtedly fit Metanira's specifications well, so Volos thought of him first. "I have no objections, considering she chose your arrow. But then again, do you really plan on fulfilling her wish?" Eros responded somewhat indifferently, yet with a hint of curiosity. Before coming here, that fellow who seemed to be their father god, or perhaps not, had told them of the events here and that they could use this as a pretext to get something from Demeter, but he seemed to threaten, not to actually take action. Therefore, even though the queen performed much, exhibiting her intense emotions, in fact, from the beginning, the twins had not intended to honor the agreement. They just needed an arrow that could deter Demeter. As for mortal hatred, it mattered little whether it was avenged or not. After all, their need for revenge was merely a consequence of the law's influence at the time of their conception. As the twins shaped directly from the Heavenly Father's blood followed a different trajectory than their original destiny, they were influenced not just by love and beauty but also had a tight connection to the power of the three Furies. But in the end, they were not Furies themselves, so they had no strong attachment to avenging others' grievances. As for breaking their word, regrettably, the newly born twins also had no concept of being as good as their word. Although you say that, Eros, can't we still shoot him?" Pocketing the now cleaner golden arrow, feeling the power awaken with the stimulus of the hatred, Volos casually questioned. It was just a suggestion, suggesting that we could threaten her, but letting her witness the power first won't hurt, right? Besides, the goddess of agriculture doesn't know I only have one golden arrow. Across from him, after a moment of silence, Eros pondered briefly, then nodded decisively. "You're right, it should be possible." "Yes, that seems to be the idea." It sounded interesting, so why refuse? Though they were the twin deities of desire, the recently born divinities had not yet witnessed what truly fervent love looked like, and seeing it now wouldn't be a bad thing. As for what would happen between Poseidon and Demeter, Eros did not care in the slightest. Perhaps it was the residual influence of their primordial god's nature. Although their power was nearly gone, a certain mentality remained. Just as gods view mortals, in the eyes of Eros, there was no difference between Demeter and Poseidon. Even if they possessed great power, at best it was like the difference between how humans view cattle, sheep, and lions, tigers. They were not of the same kind, and the opinions of different kinds could naturally be disregarded. Then let's be on our way. With a change in demeanor, even beginning to urge onward, with a flicker in the void, the silhouettes of the twins vanished from the room. The palace of the queen returned to quietude, with only a faint scent of blood slowly spreading. And from beginning to end, they had not given the body of the queen on the ground another glance. In the southern sea, the palace of the Sea Emperor. Embracing a merperson beside him, the descendant whose generation he did not know, Poseidon took a sip of nectar in his cup, watching the lively dance and song before him. He was in a good mood, as the losses from the previous deluge had finally been recouped. The humans on the islands were developing well, and aside from still being unable to beat the god of the ocean, there didn't seem to be anything dissatisfying him. Although he couldn't match Zeus, the divine king, Poseidon felt his life was much better than Hades's, and gradually, the Sea Emperor began indulging in pleasure-seeking. There were still many goals, but they could be delayed for another day. Being happy for a day or two wouldn't hurt, so life continued in this way for a long time. Even when a premonition, whether a warning or not, flashed through his mind, he remained blissfully unaware.